On the fringes of organized society, away from villages, lies power, ritual, and magic for those with the strength to take it, the savviness to remain hidden, and the willingness to sacrifice much. We are talking about folk magic once again. Hello, I am Kyle, and welcome to Desks and Dorks. We make historically themed role-playing game content. A couple of things. If you want to support us, the best ways to do so, we have a Patreon page right now. If you would like to get your name in the credits of our episodes, if you'd like to get early access to Desks and Dorks content, and if you would like to get an RPG every single month, a unique role-playing game that you can't get anywhere else, the only way to do that, it's on our Patreon. QR code will take you there, so will the link in the description. If you're a person who likes PDFs, you can use this QR code or the link in the description to take you to itch.io. And if you're a person who likes physical games, you can get them from our partners over at Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, and Exalted Funeral. All of these fine retailers carry Desks and Dorks role-playing games if you find yourself wanting a physical copy for your coffee table or your bookshelf. And last but certainly not least, I was trained as a Eurocentric medievalist. That is an emphasis on Eurocentrism there because, let's be real here, witchcraft exists so far outside of modern Europe, and there are so many interesting ways to do it. The only reason I'm leaving those sections of the world out are because, for the most part, I do not have the training in nuance to present them with the respect they deserve. If you're going to lean onto the horrific, I'd suggest using some safety tools or some communication tools. Somebody said that that's how they phrase those, and I kind of like that a little bit. But one more thing, this is going to be more game-centric than usual. I want to throw in even more game ideas and game aspects at you, and I thought you would all enjoy. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about 3 of the core principles of good folk magic. And just like real estate, my friends, we have to talk a little bit about location. You see, in traditional high fantasy role-playing games, you might be willing to find a great wizard pondering their orb, polishing their staff, and other strange magic euphemisms in a large, totally not compensating for anything, tower in the middle of nowhere. Now, this is really cool because A, aura farming is pretty sweet, good job there, wizards, and B, it does kind of work to hype up the arcane enchantment level of things. However, there's some issues with this when we're talking about folk magic. You see, folk magic, as we are traditionally aware of it, is something that is practiced by individuals on the fringes. So your traditional wizards guild or arcane college, quote unquote, like, I don't know, I'm not going to use the one, pig farts, there we go. I'm going to use the American version of it from the musical that they did. But something along those lines is probably accepted by the social norms. Strixhaven, that's a good example of a magic college. Our folk magic practitioner, however, is somebody who probably does not have the ability or the exception or the accepting nature of society to continue to practice their craft. And as a result of that, they're going to have to work very hard to keep their hideouts hidden. Now again, this is especially true for religious spellcasters who fall outside of an established monotheistic or polytheistic pantheon, who might want to hide their particular veneration. And so when you're leaning into those things, and this is true historically, by the way, for individuals who practice magic or ritual outside of real historical norms. Roman cults, for example, often found their hideouts in places like traditional businesses or in the basements of abandoned buildings or even in the ruins of construction projects that were abandoned by the empire as it began to shrink in Rome's later fading glory days. So again, this has some real historical precedent, but there are some things that I want you as a game master or as a historian to think about when we're considering where your folk magician might be basing themselves. The first thing is obviously that it needs to be private. Remember, these are individuals who are practicing magic and ritual, and they need to be kept away from prying eyes, and as a result, they need a place that is secret. Again, I just thought this was really hard. Apparently a bunch of office buildings are now upgrading with secret passages. And I was like, man, I've never heard of a better argument to get into corporate office work than having my own private meeting room hidden behind a bookshelf. That sounds pretty sweet. But also, they need to be innocuous. Now, if I just have a magic bookshelf floating in the middle of, a racetrack or something along those lines, it's not going to matter if it's private because it doesn't blend in with the scenery. You are looking for something like this Danny DeVito shrine, by the way, that was hidden inside of an abandoned locker. You are looking for something that is going to blend in with your surroundings to allow your mage, witch, warlock, what have you, a little bit of time to escape or to never be found, which I think is very interesting. And you also want it to serve multiple purposes. For this one, I'm going to draw on popular folklore, but consider the walking hut of Baba Yaga, a witch of Russian or Slavic folkloric origin. One of the things that makes her hard to catch is her freaking house just moves all of the time. Imagine that you think you know where the witch is, and then you roll up to her crib only to find that her crib has rolled up on you. I think that's a fantastic concept, and it does a lot for us to work with. And so I've actually conjured up, I'm going to continue to use some magic puns here, but I've conjured up a couple different ideas for how this would work, and I thought if you would all indulge me just this once, I would move beyond the medieval, and I would move into another corner of folklore that I love very deeply, which is the woods of Appalachia. You see, growing up, I did a lot of hiking, a lot of mountaineering, a lot of exploring around my hometown, and I remember very vividly a single shack. Painted on the wall of this shack was a red runic circle, and inside that circle was a being that was like partially elephant, partially snaked, and winged, and it was always in this abandoned shack. We only ever trekked out to the abandoned shack once. Later on, it was destroyed. It was torn down by a storm and replaced with a billboard later on as the road sort of encroached onto that section of the wilderness. And I'm kind of glad for it because, good God, something about that place and that drawing, that illustration done in red spray paint, gave me the willies. But it got me thinking about something kind of innocuous. So if you have traveled through Appalachia at all, you might be familiar with these sort of rusted train cars. I thought it would be really interesting and intriguing if perhaps a folk magic practitioner had a train car kind of like this one. Now, it fits a lot of what we're working with, right? It's private. No one's really going to go in there, or at the very least, it offers some protection from prying eyes. It's innocuous. Again, if you have traveled in Appalachia or in the Rust Belt, you have probably driven past many train tracks or old depots that have rusting or decaying train carts quite like this one, and it could serve a dual purpose. I envision this train car hideout as being able to float or hover just above the space where the old tracks have rotted away, thus allowing the witch to make a quick getaway or even like run over potential attackers. But then I thought, what if we extrapolated this to something that's a more recent sign of urban decay? Why don't we take a look at the mall witch? You see, here's the thing about malls. They make for really evocative and interesting set pieces. My love of liminal spaces is very well documented if you're an old fan of our older podcast that has since been discontinued. But I love the idea of the mall being the hunting grounds rather, for a particular group or even a single powerful folk magic practitioner. And it makes sense, right? A lot of these spaces have access tunnels that were used by staff and security that are hidden behind the walls, or the other features of the mall that a group of adventurers or urban explorers and spelunkers would not be aware of. A witch of some kind or a folk magician could use these not just to get in and out, but to make attacks and aggressive overtures at people going through their domain. Also, imagine the horror that your players would have to face as a horde of mannequins is resurrected or given some false life by these folk magic practitioners, and they're then swarmed by a bunch of things clad in Gap and Old Navy clothes. Nothing says total disrespect like getting stomped out by somebody wearing something you could have bought with Kohl's cash. I think that's pretty incredible. And not only do we have especially the just mannequins in general, but there's horrifying types of mannequins. Imagine all that's left over in this mall are the lower torso mannequins, and so you just hear the hobbling, the wobbling as they crashing as these lower torso mannequins sprint towards the players helter skelter, but are like tripping and falling into things or tripping and falling over one another. Again, kind of goofy, but also really, really genuinely terrifying. Mannequins, especially the different types of them, make for fantastic nightmare fuel, but I also thought, how terrifying would it be if this folk magic practitioner sealed the souls of the individuals who would attempt to hunt them into the old mall promotional posters that hung out throughout the walls? I think this is a really genuinely terrifying way to cast a very familiar sight, at least in Middle America, and turn it into something that is a true playground of horror for an individual with magical abilities. But I think it goes beyond that too, because if we really want to lean into the historic, let's consider the idea of mentorship. You see, folk magic practitioners often learn from, or at least study under, an individual who passes them on. And unlike a magical teacher like the one pictured here, or the ones at academies like Strixhaven, these are folk traditions in addition to being spells. So I talked about my love for Appalachia, but in many cases, folk magic was passed on from grandmother to granddaughter, or in some cases just from grandparent to parent, from parent to child, going all the way down. One of my favorite examples for this, if you go through Pennsylvania, shout out to Pennsylvania, my home state, you will find things called hex signs, which if I do my job right, I will put a picture of a hex sign here. These are not just fun things that the Amish and Mennonite communities put on quilts, but actually have real historic and magical meaning. Each color signifies emotions and important things that they want to imbue onto an area or to a recipient of that area, with those individual symbols, things like quails or stars, having other meanings as well. These act like a kind of folk rune that gets stitched into quilts or painted onto the sides of barns. And if you drive through any area with a large, Mennonite or Amish population, you will most likely see these. And this is a craft of folk magic that is passed down even now, which I do think is interesting. So I think if you're making a folk magician or leaning into the tropes of folk magic, I do think that you need to consider apprenticeship and mentorship. This is a huge thing. Folk magic is not just about power, it is about community, it is about understanding, and it is about learning, hopefully, from someone who's a little bit more kind than this fine individual right here. Now, you could consider a more boring example of mentorship, getting a +2 bonus when you're casting a spell or on a certain magic type. Ho, hum, boo, hiss. But I'm much more of a fan of getting access to a special technique that has been passed down from master to apprentice, from grandparent to parent, or from parent to child. Some of these I think that you should do, but just like think about the idea of like making a temporary clone of yourself somewhere on the battlefield, and then that clone launches whatever the next spell is. You essentially get a double cast, but you have to telegraph that you're doing it. That could be potentially interesting. You could have one where the first time you take damage, you swap with somebody. Perhaps even an enemy target, a switcheroo kind of spell, or you could even have a technique that lets you swap years of life for power, but the trade-off isn't that it's years of your life, the trade-off is that it's the years of lives of the people that you love and care about. This adds all kinds of horror to using these powers, and remember, a folk magician or a folk magic user isn't somebody who is in it for total power, right? In history, like in our historical records, these are midwives, these are medicine women, these are wise men, these are shamans, they are storytellers, they are history keepers of tribes and of small rural communities. As such, the pain of having to draw magical ability and power from the community that you love and respect could be a really horrific crime, it could be a weapon of last resort, or it could even be seen by those communities as a necessary sacrifice to help defend them in times of great need. And I think that's a really cool way to lean in to those historical trappings of the folk magic user. But lastly, oh, by the way, if you've never read The Crooked Man, the original Hellboy comic, you absolutely need to. It is peak Appalachia, peak what I would consider like redneck noir. It's absolutely fantastic and does a great job of sort of showing the greater nuances of folk magic traditions in a region that not only do I live in and around, but that is very near and dear to my heart. That's my recommendation to you, fellow GMs, if you're looking for inspiration. But lastly, I want you to lean into the specific nature of bespoke charms. Now, if you've watched our low fantasy video, which if you have not, you should. It's probably the piece of content I am still, after all this time, the most proud of making. I know our other videos, like our gold video and our bronze age video, did really well, but I love the low fantasy video, and I did a whole section on charms there, so I wanted to just sort of rehash it here because I think it was time to revisit the charm. You see, historically, charms were not just the provenance of the wealthy, of the powerful, of the rich. Many charms were handcrafted. They were designed to be easily concealed, and they were always hyper-specific. Charms were designed to help protect and care for people from very specific threats. And again, you can see that in the actual ways that they did things. Some charms combined the religious with the magical. Again, this has a little bit of a prayer hidden on that compact. And some of them really tried to lean into the more horrific, but to create the experience of having medieval charms, only a small fraction of your folk charms should actually work, and the players should have a terrible time figuring out which is which. The reason you would do this is kind of what the medieval peasant, or even the person going into the later times, would have experienced. They would carry numerous lucky charms and lucky talismans on them, and so if something good happened, sure, it could be one of those charms, but they had no way of knowing which meant they would just continue to carry all of them. In a similar fashion, I think your players should have this sort of needle in a haystack experience when they're looking for magical charms that lean into these hyper-specific or historically inspired themes. And as I am wont to do, here is a phenomenal charm table. Please take a screenshot, take a picture, use this at your leisure. Again, you want weird charm abilities. Do not give them rerolls. Do not give them a flat +2. Don't give them advantage and disadvantage. Ho-hum, snore, boring. If you're making folk magic a focal point of what you're doing, it needs to be really specific. The ability to smell vampires. The idea that once per week you can speak with a chicken and you can compel it to do what you want. The idea that if someone touches the sole of your shoes, they always have a general idea of where you are. These are really the weird, the intriguing, and the different kinds of folk magic charms that you can do. Here are 10 of them. Again, use them at your leisure. But remember, folk charms are supposed to be hyper-specific. They would have been specific to an individual peasant or individual person's needs and desires. They should be easily concealed. Remember, magic, specifically folk magic on the fringes, is something to be hunted down by authorities, or at the very least, something you don't want to be socially ostracized for doing. And it should be weird. It should be bespoke. It should be a little nitty-gritty, kind of like this. And with that, my friends, that brings us to the end of our video. I know it's a shorter one, but if you want to be dialed in to more of our content, if you'd like a shout out in our videos, early access to Desks and Dorks content, and a free role-playing game or I guess it's not free, you're paying for the Patreon, but if you want a role-playing game every single month, the QR code will take you there. Again, itch.io, get you some PDFs of our games, and a massive thank you to Dionysus, to Chris Bates, to Agile Monk, and to Ignacio Zeggers for being our patrons and helping me to continue to make the videos that I love making, especially when I get to talk about one of my favorite topics of all time, folk magic. But until next time, I'm Kyle out for Desks and Dorks. You've all been absolutely amazing. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.